Okay. Hello, and thank you all for joining me today. My name is Ali Mobatter, and I'm going to be elaborating on what I got out of author Keith Matheny's article titled Michigan Ahead of Curve on New Biden Administration Plan to Eliminate Lead Water Lines. Quite a long title, but it's quite an amazing read, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Author Keith Matheny begins by informing the reader of Biden's administration and their plan to replace 100% of the lead water lines across the nation within a decade. This is all a part of the EPA's proposed improvements to the lead and copper rule. Federal officials took great pride in their efforts, noting that cities across the nation had begun and accelerated work in the removal of these lead service lines. Now that sounds amazing. However, over 9 million lead service lines are still in use, with a large majority of them being in underprivileged and poorly funded areas. The image on the right indicates just how many lead water lines were in service before any revisions were made. To illuminate on this idea further, Matheny tells us about Benton Harbor, a city located in southwest Michigan. Benton Harbor was one of the many cities that federal officials cited when talking about progress on the matter at hand. However, for action to take place in Benton Harbor, the citizens of the city had to endure 3 whole years with unsafe drinking water and had to create a petition just to finally draw the EPA's attention and begin work on removing water lines. Before we delve deeper into Michigan's involvement on the issue, it's important to understand what caused the rise in concern regarding lead contamination. In 2014, a state-appointed emergency manager made the decision to switch water suppliers. Rather than using the Detroit water system, Flint would be using water from the Flint River. The sudden switch and failure to take precautions and complete proper tests resulted in a substantial increase in lead concentration. By taking a look at the graph on the right, we can see just how substantial the increase was, and that exposure lasted upwards of a year and a half. The Flint water crisis amassed lots of attention. However, it still took another 4 years to get the lead service lines replaced and have the water test below federal guidelines. Because of Flint's water crisis, Michigan made its own revisions to the lead and copper rule in 2018. Michigan's revised rules included an initial inventory of lead and other potentially harmful pipes. A reduction in the lead concentration limit was also proposed, lowering the lead action limit from 15 to 12 micrograms per liter. A new supplier requirement was also put in place. They are now required to replace 5% of the lead service lines on a yearly basis. Federal requirements had drawn inspiration from Michigan, implementing similar and even more strict requirements, lowering the national lead limit further, and lowering the overall estimated time for the replacement of these lead pipes. Cities like Detroit, having some of the state's oldest infrastructure, are intensifying their efforts to replace old and harmful underground utilities. Unlike Michigan, the federal government did not require that the removal of these lead pipes follow an entire line approach. What this means is that rather than replacing entire service lines, providers will only be obligated to remove main lines. This leaves lines connecting into homes virtually unchanged, leaving homeowners in charge of replacing said lines or installing said lead certified filters. This leaves people feeling conflicted as they feel that citizens should not bear the cost of these changes. Furthermore, the cost of action on such a large scale can prove to be far too expensive, even for some of the nation's largest cities, and pushing the responsibility on citizens will slow down the course of action dramatically and potentially lead to increasing conflict. Before this presentation comes to an end, I would like to complete a quick recap of what we went over today. First, the EPA and its proposed lead and copper rule aims to replace all lead and copper pipes across the United States within a decade. The federal government is implementing its own legislation on the matter. However, due to the Flint, Michigan water crisis, it seems as though Michigan is a little bit ahead, so much so that the federal government is drawing inspiration from Michigan for the matter. Older cities like Detroit, with much higher quantities of outdated infrastructure, are coming to the realization that the changes are going to be very costly. With the discussion of costs, problems begin to arise. The replacement of these lead pipes across the country is without a doubt going to be very, very costly and very, very timely. Thank you so much. That's all we have for today. The professor asked that I answer these two questions. So when asked what was the most difficult part of completing this project, I'd say that the most difficult part was really memorizing what I'm going to have to say to the best of my ability and not looking at my notes as much as I felt like I had to. What aspects of completing this project were challenged or contradicted what I previously thought about slide presentations? I always thought that I had to simply just memorize my speech, but I had to come to realization that understanding the paper and understanding my speech and understanding my presentation helped so much in just memorizing and regurgitating. So thank you so much for listening.